Okay, we are live.
All right.
How you doing, Phil?
Good. How you doing, Carson?
Doing good. Um, okay, so we are going to go over some police videos. Let's see. Did you want to talk about anything before we start watching some videos?
Uh, no, no. I
Okay.
just to let everybody know, I'm here watching my little baby in the nursery and drinking some coffee, and I brought some snacks, and I'm ready to go. Police videos.
All right, sounds good. Let's see. Share. Um, and I don't know if you have a way to pause the video from your end. So if you see a moment you want to talk about, you could just like
Mhm.
flag me down or say pause or whatever. So okay, here we go. Then make sure this volume's good. Okay.
I did already watch all of this, but it's for the sake of a possible viewer, right?
Yeah, correct.
This incident occurred in the area of 19th Avenue and Southern Avenue. An officer was at a gas station in the area, working through an unrelated call for service, when he was notified by a community member about a man nearby who was waving a machete. The officer saw the adult male suspect walking south along 19th Avenue on the sidewalk, waving the machete around, before eventually walking into a vacant dirt lot. The officer called for backup, and they tried to keep the suspect contained to the dirt lot, away from other community members.
Negative, separate issue. He's threatened a couple patrons of the QT, but right now it seems like a 918 issue, but he's got a machete in his hand. He's threatening passing cars. I don't know how many calls you're going to get on this.
I might move my car over there in case he goes that way.
Okay, I'll probably pause throughout as we watch this just to see like what you would think, how you would think we should react. What do you think makes sense in this case? Like when you see somebody walking around with a machete.
Well, we're gonna see here in a second that he radios back the dispatch that it's a mental health code. Um, so that would be my first thought is either mental health code. Sometimes you think that this is more of a suicide by cop situation, right? But that's also I don't know. It's
Gotcha.
somebody losing their mind, right? The mental health
Yeah,
code
yeah.
is most likely what's going on.
Gotcha. I think I remember the code being brought up, and I looked it up, and I wasn't able to track down what it was. So it was a mental health code. Well, here I'll play a few more seconds, and then I'll pause.
Keep him off the street. Like, put my car over there, keep him from going to the street. You stay that way. Get back. Get back. Put it down. Put it down. Drop it. 411 Bravo. We're gonna need a nice.
The suspect ignored the officer and continued walking southbound along 19th Avenue and eventually into the roadway. The third officer to arrive retrieved a less lethal stun bag shotgun from his patrol vehicle before approaching the suspect.
Okay, so one thing that I think is kind of interesting here, I I mean they're not showing everything, but do you think that they are trying to track down a bilingual person in the unit? I wonder how necessary it is in certain areas to make sure that there's an officer on duty at all times that speaks a language that is likely to be spoken by a possible suspect.
That's one of the first things I thought when I heard him speaking what sounded to me like Spanish. I don't speak enough Spanish to say for sure, but it did sound like Spanish. Um, I I thought the same thing exactly. I do think that at the same time they wouldn't be able to wait though. They'd also have to address the situation while they inform dispatch that he seems to be speaking Spanish and they need to get a translator down. If one of those guys doesn't speak Spanish, maybe they do.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the information is here. It's a pretty short video.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let me see.
Drop the the knife, bro. You're gonna get sandbagged. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, bro. Right now.
Listen, can I
Drop
pause
the
it?
knife.
Yeah.
Just to correct myself, as they're yelling instructions to him, obviously they don't, because otherwise they'd be yelling those instructions in Spanish.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. 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 It's tricky because I guess you could try to follow the person without, trying to, as long as you keep them away from people, you could follow them until somebody can arrive that can speak Spanish. But I would say that you're not obligated to wait if there's a safety issue. I don't know. I don't know how close somebody would have to get to somebody for that to change. Like as soon as you get within like 10 feet of a house or something, like is it all of a sudden that you're too much of a safety risk? Yeah.
No, I think that I think there's never those hard and fast rules that always have to be applied. That's why I'm not sure how to answer a couple of the law proposals in the newest proposal. Like, if someone is trying to break into your house, can you shoot them? I would absolutely say no, because you don't need that rule in order to still have a self-defense rule. It's just that you don't have some special right to kill somebody because they're breaking into your house. I would just also say that you don't have some special, liability that you can't kill someone when they're breaking into your house. It just depends on whether or not you're defending yourself and your family.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I got a question to ask you on that one, but here, let's finish this video up, and then I'll ask you that one in a sec. Let's see.
Drop the knife. Get back. Fucking knife. Drop. Drop the knife.
Here's a portion of the body-worn camera video from the fourth officer on scene, who positioned his vehicle in the roadway to the south of the suspect.
Hey.
I don't know if that second footage was helpful because it was made it harder to see actually. It's tricky because I mean the guy definitely started coming at the cop. The cop shoots. Well, one thing I want to point out, I've heard some people talk about how cops need to be better at talking gently and being more approachable. And I think that just because something is natural to us doesn't mean we should be able to do it. But at the same time, when you're in like high stress situations, I don't know, it makes sense. Like when he's saying, drop the fucking knife, like should there be a rule where police officers can't use the F word,
No,
or
there
like
should definitely be no rules like that.
right. Yeah. And, so I just don't know, like, Jeremy was talking about how, like, if they were more approachable when they first are talking to people, which I agree, it's good to be nice, but like, what would those regulations look like? Like, what would it sound like if all police officers were told, hey, when you're first approaching a suspect, try not to sound too angry because they might work well with you if you're not coming across angry. Like, at what point do we call something angry?
Well, I think that, here's the thing. They realized this was probably a mental health issue. And yet they still went in aggressively. Usually aggression works. And here's the thing. Aggressive screaming and yelling and pointing your weapon in somebody's face can absolutely save their life. Because a person who's in a normal state of mind suddenly gets scared into realizing how serious the situation is, and that can save their life. But here, the guy is already walking around with a machete. I don't see how the aggression helps. It seems like he's more using it as a default. But to answer your actual question, what would that look like? It would look like training. We wouldn't have to have. As a matter of fact, it's counterproductive to try to have these absolute rules where, if he's charging at you, but he's 16 feet away and not within 10 feet, then you can do this. But if he's this weight, then he only represents this danger. So you should do this other thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to rely on the judgment of officers in the moment to take the entire context into consideration.
Yeah.
And
Especially if your focus is on, I'm aware that within seconds, the best thing to do is to shoot this person dead. You can't really be too focused on how your personality is coming across or how your tone's coming across.
no, you have to be. That's part of the training, and that's why.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, you have to be cognizant of that, and that's why the training is so important, because he should walk into the situation like saying to himself, okay, I'm approaching someone, they have a knife, me or you, we're driving up. Take a couple breaths. Maybe the first thing I'll say to him is, hey, maybe not buddy. I don't know what word I could use, because buddy's almost cliche aggressive. Hey, can you help me? Like, what if somebody approached that guy and said, can you help me? Right? Will that reach a part of him? But this is just me spitballing here, because there are two big approaches to de-escalating, right? In military speak, there's the term escalate to de-escalate. That's using intimidation, right? Using force so that you put a situation to an end before it gets even worse. That's what I was talking about, where a lot of times somebody who they think that just talking their way out of it will stop it, or maybe they're in a normal state of mind and you need to get them to understand how serious something is. So yeah, you'll get criticized for taking someone to the ground, for screaming in their face, pointing the gun at them, but it could have saved their lives, rather than in some situations where people always take it a little step further and it continues to gradually escalate until someone loses their life, right? But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, okay, so this talk was planned to be a one-on-one, but there's actually a special guest that's coming in here.
Okay.
And this guy goes by the name the Cavasier. Am I pronouncing this right? I don't know.
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
you are. You're pronouncing it well.
Okay, Cavasier, yes. Okay, so
We have a show tomorrow, I believe.
what's that?
I hope the mic's working okay.
Yeah, I can hear you good. Phil, can
Okay.
you hear him?
Yeah.
We have a show tomorrow, so I want to get in on this one. It's pretty good. I'm all for what Phil said. The de-escalation thing for military tactics. I would suppose the lady in the first video probably did this when she first drew her pistol. Whereas the other cops, they had to do what they had to do. He was a clear violent threat, where the other guys in the other videos, I would say there's more legal jargon to be talked about.
Yeah. So quick question for both of you. If the guy did not turn and come at the police officers, is there a certain amount of time that they should just keep following him? So he has the machete, he keeps walking. If he stays away from citizens and he's not charging at the police officers, but they let's imagine even if they got somebody that spoke Spanish, he's not talking with them. What do you do at that point?
I can answer that. There is no time. That's sort of like, we can't establish, if they're within 10 feet, do this. Each time, it might be frustrating. I think with the way you wrote some of the laws, that you'd really like to have this written down in concrete so that like by the book, what they're supposed to do. But if you have more time, right, that will save someone's life, then use that time. So.
That makes sense, yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I mean, look, if a guy's in the middle of the city park waving a machete, it would be probably even more of a threat to take him out as fast as possible. If you can't breach that communication gap, if he's speaking, a different language, things can happen in that time that may lose life. So I do believe we're on the same page in that. It's very, very cut and dry. Police, in my opinion, didn't do anything wrong. They used the bags at first. They tried to, breach the gap. He was
I'm
he was
curious,
going to kill the other
Carson.
officer.
I just want to mention,
Yeah.
Carson, you did say he turned toward the officer. It looked to me like he was pacing back and forth in the road.
Hmm.
But he wields his machete near the end as he drew his pistol, and he tries to basically breach that gap. And I think go ahead, Carson.
I was just gonna say, it seemed like he, as the police officer was shooting the bags, he was coming at him. But then once he stopped, it looked like maybe the guy turned towards the other officer to the left of the one that shot. But it seemed like he was almost kind of walking away when he started shooting. But it's also one of those things where if somebody's coming at you and you go, now is the time I need to shoot. When you're in your motion to grab your gun to shoot, that couple seconds where it looks like somebody's walking away, that somebody might go, oh, he is walking away. I don't think people realize what seconds in a mind feels like. Once your mind is ready to shoot because you think it's necessary for survival, you're not going to be able to, I wouldn't think you're going to be able to stop shooting mid shoot.
Do both of you know about the 21 foot rule? So if someone is 21 feet away from you with a weapon, besides a long range weapon, they can breach the distance in a second. If they have a knife and such. So they were far closer than 21 meters. Probably why they had the shotgun beanbags. After the warning shots, I think if you're not gonna settle down, what happened was predictable, but I do think the man was probably high on something, making him more of a danger if they allow him to escape. So.
Just to add context to what you said, because someone else might not make the connection, the beanbags are the stun bags are a longer range weapon than a regular stun gun. So they'll want to keep them outside of 21 feet. And the stun bags will help to be able to stun the suspect before he's inside that range.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, one other thing that I think is interesting, and I'm curious to hear if you guys think there should be different cases, 4 different cases, different outcomes. But from my understanding, you never shoot to wound. A lot of people will say, oh, in this case, this officer should have shot in the leg or something like that. So one thing people don't realize is it's really hard to aim for specific things like limbs, like to shoot somebody's hand, to shoot a gun out. I've heard people think that somebody should do that. So I get why in most cases, if you have to shoot, you're shooting to kill. If you don't need to kill for protection of yourself and others, then you don't shoot. And so it's kind of this, there's either no shooting or shoot to kill. Do you guys think that there's ever cases like this one where maybe there should be more of a shoot to wound, where you have a little extra time?
I think that officers should absolutely have a great deal of discretion when they think it's appropriate, not only to shoot to wound if they feel they can do it, but also to stop shooting, right? Because they are trained, just to shoot, I don't know how many shots it is, but 3-4 shots, center of mass. If in those seconds they're deciding, okay, he only has a melee weapon, he only has what do you have? Not a cleaver, but a machete. Yeah, so he's actually falling after taking a couple of bullets. If the officer keeps firing, maybe that's allowed, right? Because he's in his zone of I got to take him out. But if the officer doesn't keep firing, that's even better. They have to have discretion to have mercy. That's really important. And they're not always trained to do that, and I think that should be a part of the acceptable training.
Gotcha. Contrarian 420 says in the chat, there's also increased liability for shooting to wound. Same with firing warning shots, because the implication is that you didn't think it was truly a life or death scenario.
Yeah, that's fair. I wanted to piggyback on what Phil was saying there.
Mm-hmm.
The extra training they could pursue, I do believe may probably help a few cases, but overall, I think statistically, if I was in that situation, for example, the training I received formally probably would override other training in a harsh situation like this, where you have a clear aggressor. You're going to feel a little bit pressured to revert to something that's safe. And as you said, Carson, it's likely just going to be a firing through the chest as many times as possible when you are feeling in a heated situation. But I am mixed with the wounds and fatally and trying to shoot to wound, if that makes sense. Because you can end up killing a man if you try and wound them as well. So for them, it's a cut and dry situation, their life or the suspect's life. But I suppose if they train to do non-lethal shots more, it could change for sure. People can make the argument that, I could fire a few rounds towards the ground or the feet, but you may be dead once you fire those rounds.
Yeah, I do want to highlight that there should be no assumption ever that an officer is able to just like select the suspect's legs and shoot the legs. That's also often very fatal, right? Shooting the legs, or it can be. But the point is, like, you can't just decide to shoot a certain part of the body. It's hard enough to shoot center of mass with a pistol. Like, anybody who says that should go out to the range and just fire at a mere, 20 yards with a pistol a couple times to see if they can hit even just the target every single time. So,
yeah. Okay, let's go to the next video. Let's see. Share screen.
and just to highlight that too, that's when someone else isn't running toward you and your hand is shaking.
Yeah. Yep. Moving target, hard to hit for sure. Yeah. No, it's wild stuff. Okay, let's open this one up. This one's a unique case.
This one's nuts.
Yeah.
This one is really special.
Get out of the car.
Shocking body camera footage shows the moments a police officer opens fire on a pair of teenagers in a McDonald's parking lot. It happened in San Antonio, Texas on October 2nd. Just before 10:30 that evening, officials received a call for a disturbance at a local McDonald's. When Officer James Brenard responded to the call, he noticed a vehicle that was involved in a separate incident.
I got a vehicle over here that fled from me the other day. He's in the parking lot.
Yeah, boy. Get somebody else on.
After calling for backup, Brenard walked over to the vehicle and opened the door.
Get out of the car.
Body camera video shows the driver, later identified as 17-year-old Eric Cantu, with a stunned look on his face and what appears to be a McDonald's meal in his lap. After just 1 second of delay, Cantu puts the vehicle in reverse and attempts to drive off. The vehicle's open door hits Brenard and he opens fire. When Cantu continues driving off, Brenard opens fire for a second time.
Shots fired! Shots fired! Shots fired!
After that, Brenard begins chasing the vehicle.
Earlier, you got a return on it right now.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
Cantu and the 17-year-old girl in the passenger seat were pulled over on a nearby street. Cantu was taken to the hospital to be treated for critical injuries. He was later charged with evading detention with a vehicle and assault on a peace officer.
Okay. There's a little more on like the outcome for the police officer, I think. But just as far as what we just saw, Phil, what's your take?
Yeah, there's more in the outcome for the police officer. He was fired in the end. And just to let you know, the reason he did that is he recognized this guy from a previous stop where he had gotten away from him, and then he saw the car parked there. I just happened to know this story from when it happened.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if there was a warrant, or was it just like because of the previous situation?
As far as I'm aware, there was not a warrant because he had not yet been identified. Right? It was just
Okay.
he knew the car and he knew that kid had gotten away from him.
Gotcha. Do you think that affects it? Do you think that it's more? Do you think it's not acceptable to have approached the way he did, just the approaching? And do you think a warrant would change that?
I don't think so, because you have to, like, I'm approaching it from the situation of, like, the citizens have to obey orders from the police, and they can sue them later if the orders are illegal. And from the police officer's point of view, he did a lot wrong anyway. So I don't know what to say. He definitely should have waited for backup. It was a whole mess. He fired after, I don't want to jump the gun on analyzing the video, but he fired after the danger to him was gone. So there was a lot wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like if he waited for backup, or even without backup, if he would have put his car directly behind the guy's car, that could have benefited things. But yeah, well, I have some thoughts, but I feel like maybe a lot of people disagree with me. So let's have Kavasir, let's have your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, I had noticed the same as Phil, that the cop clearly recognizes the vehicle. But where you speak about the approach of the officer, I was thinking the same when I first saw the video. Like the first time I did watch it, I was more shocked by the approach itself. Because it seems there wasn't a fair warning to the suspect, right? But in retrospect, knowing that guy fled previously does justify his approach to some degree. And I think he did nothing wrong in any sense here. I mean, he did shoot someone who was 17, but the guy could have reversed and killed him. The cop definitely should have took precaution, but I think he was trying to sneak up on him, and get it in the bag before something.
Yeah. Well, let me compare it to like a hypothetical. So let's say somebody had like a bat or something like that, and they got in a confrontation with a police officer, and they swung the bat at the police officer. And then after they do that, the person starts running, and they're running away. Police officer is saying stop. Police officer is chasing after them, but the officer can't catch up with them. Should the officer be able to shoot them because they know they can't keep up with them, and the person was violent towards them? Or should shootings only be in direct self-defense?
That's a good situation to base interaction on. I would say it does depend on the suspect. Like, if you have a violent criminal, sexual predator, for example, or a previous murderer, I would say shooting them is probably a good safe bet if you can't catch them, because you're potentially allowing them to maybe go on and do the same crime without cause to not know the suspect. The police officer obviously has less reason to do so, but if you aren't going to cooperate, I suppose in the perfect society, a metaphysical example I'll give: if we lived in a perfect society and someone disobeyed a police officer, there'd have to be a reason for it, right? And so that person's going to continue doing crime no matter the consequence if they're going to flee from an officer. So in my worldview, I would say you would be justified and maybe shoot.
Gotcha. Okay. Because, so I think we have a couple different cases. So we have that you can shoot somebody if they are a threat, a threat to the life of a civilian or to yourself or to another officer. And then we have the question, which I just posed to you, which is if somebody is a criminal, if they are reasonably being stopped for violent activity, and they get a warning and they're told you need to stop right now and they don't, is the fleeing something worth taking the life of? And I think it's complicated. I don't think the answer, I think most people think the answer is no, but I don't think the answer is no. Whether it was a cop or not, the person used their vehicle when reversing and how the door is placed. They willingly used their vehicle, willing to crash part of their car into the cop, or run his foot over. What if the door knocked him down and his leg went under the car? This person, whether they're 17 or not, was willing to use their vehicle in this way. So when they're leaving and he's shooting as they're fleeing, it's the question of, is this reasonable because a person willing to use a car in a violent way is now going to be off with citizens in the world?
Okay,
Phil, what do you think?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that last. I'm glad I let you finish before interrupting. You mentioned that last part because there's a really critical distinction between. Oh wait, pup, my baby. There's a really critical distinction between whether or not shooting them as they're fleeing is a kind of revenge, because in this case, because he did use his vehicle as a weapon, right? Or is it just that because, as you said, because he was willing to use his vehicle as a weapon against the officer, therefore he might be willing to just run over the next person. So maybe he should be shot. I don't think it rises to that level. And I think it was appropriate for the officer to be fired here.
Yeah.
But to answer your previous question, that's a more specific incident. But to answer your previous question, is it appropriate to kill a fleeing suspect because, if they're bad enough to flee, then may as well get rid of them, I think if I could create a new country made entirely of my clones, then yeah, that rule would be fine. Don't flee from officers. Like, that's who we have to trust to enforce laws. But I just don't think that would lead to any positive outcomes. Like, in the way we have society right now, we are so lax with the way people are allowed to conduct themselves with the police, and we're so strict and cruel with police officers. And when they try to defend themselves, we riot through the streets. To have a law like that would just make everything even more devastating. Like it would be.
Well, what about this? What if he was in prison for trying to run somebody over with the door of his car and fleeing an officer? He goes to prison and then he escapes. And as he's escaping, the only options would be let him escape or shoot him.
Well, there's already the law. Already the rule is, because I did go to school for this, the rule is you always shoot to kill whenever anyone's trying to escape, period. That's the rule.
Oh, okay. So I wonder what you mean from prison?
Yeah.
Okay. Because, yeah, isn't that kind of interesting? If they're in prison for an action, using their car to hit a cop, and they flee the prison because this is the place where they're supposed to be and they know they're not supposed to leave, you can shoot them. But if they hit the cop and you were still in the scenario and they're fleeing, they're basically just fleeing jail before they get to jail. I don't think it necessarily needs to be a 1-to-1, but it feels like it.
I really, here's the thing though. I hated that when they told me that in class. I was like, wait, they always shoot to kill? You don't even have the discretion to not kill? And he's like, nope, reach out and touch somebody. And the class started laughing, and I was just stone-faced. I was like, this is not funny. Like,
yeah, that's a real lack of humanity, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what they're likely to do. I always say that Batman should kill the Joker because he's going to escape from Arkham and he's a bad guy. If somebody just punches people in the face for no reason or stabs people for no reason or hits them with their car and they flee from prison, maybe you should shoot them. If somebody's in prison because they embezzled $1 million from their firm by taking pennies out of accounts, like they should be caught again and put back in jail and get more jail time for fleeing. But do you need to kill somebody that's their crime is not violent? So maybe that should be part of it.
I think there's a mixed bag for that. I would never, if I was an officer, I would never shoot someone who embezzled, for example. But if someone was, let's say, a fraudster, you know, in terms of drug cartels and things like this, you know, the old types of Fargo characters you see on TV, things like these, I would say they should probably receive the same level of treatment as violent criminals, because they're perpetuating a circuit of violence. Whereas if it's just a business, you know, and no one actually has been harmed, no one's lives has been hurt, yeah, I would never think of going for a killing shot, you know. But that's all I'd have to say on that little tidbit.
I would challenge you also, Carson, on something you said about the death penalty. You'd rather let, you know, one innocent person go than you'd rather let 100 guilty people go than accidentally murder one innocent person with the death penalty. We can kind of see this the same way, right? I mean, here it's even more extreme, because it's better off just to, one of these people who's trying to escape might be innocent, right? Isn't it better just to not shoot to kill if you don't have to?
No, I don't. Maybe, but I don't think so. I don't think we need to assume that everyone's possibly innocent when there might be a need to do something. If we feel the need to kill and they might be innocent.
Well, I'm talking about somebody who's just trying to get away.
Yeah. Well, I think how I would word it would be something like what Contrarian 420 says over here is the officer could shoot the fleeing perp if they reasonably feel the suspect might harm others once they get away. So
yeah, you're putting others at risk without taking action.
Yeah, and so even if somebody's wrongfully put in prison and they're innocent, and like if they were to escape, like if I were to magically know this in a hypothetical, I'd want them to get away because they're innocent. But I just don't think that's something we can act upon. I don't think that means that we need to shoot somebody that's escaping, but we need to look at what the likelihood is once they escape. Like when Ted Bundy escaped, he went and killed like 5 or 6 other people. People don't often escape. I was mostly just trying to think of an example to compare to somebody fleeing a scene. Because it's I wouldn't imagine that kid, the 17-year-old, even though he was willing to use his car against the officer, once he got away, he probably wasn't going to go like harm people. But it's tricky to know that somebody is willing to. And in a society, I think it's important to view it as if a police officer says something, you have to listen to it. If they're legally right. Obviously, if a police officer is saying something that's incorrect, like if you're in a no ID state and an officer asks for your ID, even though I don't think it's smart, you could say, no, I'm not going to show the ID, and then you get arrested or whatever. I wouldn't say that I'm declaring that person should show the ID, even though I personally think it. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I'd agree with you on that. Like, if I was pulled up right now or pulled over, as Americans say, I would do the same. I would ask them, you know, it's not legally required of me to show my ID. What's the purpose? It likely may be due to looking for a criminal, for example, to play devil's advocate. But I did want to make an anecdote for the show here today, because, you know, clearly I'm from the UK and we don't use guns for the majority of police interactions. So a lot of officers have to carry a baton or sprays and other things like this. If you really want a true picture of what happens when you don't shoot to kill, most of European cities, as well as the UK, is a good example of that. And where I live, it's pretty much non-lethal. Crime is rampant. Crime does not stop. It will not stop unless certain people are taken out. That's just a real logical conclusion people have to come to. Whether that justifies aggressive action, I don't think so, but there definitely needs to be a conversation about people assessing whether life should be taken rather than playing a humanitarian, approach to these things just because it's fashionable. I see a lot of that in American politics. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
What do you think the reason is? Do you think that they do it better there than here? Do you think that it's just the population size? Why do you think it is that there is more need for violence from cops here? And do you think there's like one thing you can point to that you think would be the biggest impact on changing that?
Lawfully, I'd say I'm a bit ignorant on knowing why, but I have a semi understanding of why, and I believe it's because I think it was 200 years ago the outlawing of weapons to be carried. So they did not want a armed populace ruling over a non-armed populace, right? Which is a bit ridiculous because legality-wise, cops still do have weapons in the UK, but they're allocated to certain areas, which may make it applicable. If we need to protect a bank or Parliament, for example. But I'll say it's likely a distinction in philosophy between the UK and America, because in the UK, I don't think they want an armed police force, a fully armed police force, to dish out judgment, simply because the British are more unruly in personhood. I think Americans are more how would I put it? Americans are far more reserved to judgment in most cases because of their history with having weapons for the duration of their history, whereas the people in England have not. They definitely would use them if politics didn't go their way, whereas in the United States, the vastness of the area, it works out. That's just my amateur view of it.
Gotcha. Yeah. I was just curious your thoughts on that. So yeah.
By the way, I'm just pacing with the baby to keep him calm.
No worries. Wholesome.
Yeah, you're good. I was just looking it up. I'll need to look up further, but it looks like so in 2018, 290 police officers in the UK were killed on the job. This last year, 2022, there was 196. It seems like about the same amount as the US when the population is way smaller. So it seems like in the UK, police officers take more of a risk. So even, yeah. What was that?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh,
that's definitely for sure. I have family who are in the police, for example. They tell me some wild stories of the amount of violence they have to see every day. And they've seen people in front of them who they've worked with for years be brutally beaten by gangs and stabbed. A lot of their former colleagues have died. But you wouldn't expect these areas to be quite high in crime. So officers tend to stay away from high crime in the UK, which doesn't really solve the problem.
Yeah,
I think,
it doesn't.
It grows the problem rather than prevents the causal reason for why these crimes happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you guys have ghettos, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll have ghettos where the culture is sort of primed the youth into violence. We have the same in the UK, obviously, with various ethnic groups. It's not just, you know, African Americans, because they commit quite a low portion of crime in the UK. So it's mostly young white or Arab men who do this because of the areas they can sort of dominate in a fast time. They know the police can't respond in a big violent way, so they take it slow, and you know they have a territory that they start to sort of threaten the police with. You know, you come here, we're not going to hold back. These types of veiled threats, and it always comes through to the prison system that trains them up in a way. It trains the career criminals better than it would, you know, just letting them away, letting them off. So shooting them may seem really bad in the ethical terms, but it can cause big problems.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, let me see. Phil, are you ready for this next one? I think Phil remembers the video pretty well, but I'm just going to hit play and then we'll see where it goes.
I don't mind waiting.
Okay. This one's kind of long, and it's not just you saw it, so it's not just the police interaction. It's this guy breaking down some ideas, which I think is pretty fascinating. But yeah, I'll just hit play on it, and I'll probably pause it in a sec.
I'm Russ Martin, former Delaware County Sheriff and Chief of Police for the City of Delaware. I worked in law enforcement for more than 40 years before recently retiring. I have no connection to the Blendon Township Police Department, but they asked me.
Hey, Phil, before we get into this one, I just wanted to ask you, so as far as our society project goes, what do you think would be a good 1 or 2 sentence wording to describe why, like, what would make it to where it's reasonable the police officer got fired when he shot the kid in the car? Would it be something like police officers can't shoot a suspect as they're fleeing? Or how would you describe it?
That would not be. See, this is where we talked previously. I think it's very important to use vague language and then enforce it fairly. So if an officer, so you have training, right? Years of training that's constantly refreshed. It's like you're on the job. I'm on the job at a hardware store. Every day I got to go back for an hour, watch videos, answer questions. It's the same thing for an officer. They have to have training all day about what is a reasonable situation to defend yourself, to defend others. And that's what it boils down to is, are you taking lethal action because you have a reasonable suspicion? Reasonable suspicion is the wrong word, but do you believe that you're saving yourself or someone else from a possible fatal situation? You know, I don't have the exact language right now, but that's the idea, is you use a vague language to say you need to use reasonable force in the situation. And, you know, a lot of people misinterpret that. They're like, oh, he only had a knife, but you had a gun. Yeah, well, if I'm not willing to use the gun, then it's more like he has a knife and I'm unarmed and he's going to kill me, right? It is reasonable force to use a gun to kill someone who has a knife.
Well, not only do they have that knife, but they have your gun as well.
Yeah, then they have your gun. Yeah.
You could kill more people with a knife.
And that's, yeah, exactly. But when it comes to the situation with the car, to me, this guy, maybe because he's an officer, you know, he didn't ask to be put in a situation like that. You know, he has to try to apprehend someone. So his blood pressure's up. He feels like he was attacked by the car, which he was, by the driver of the car. But here's the thing, the danger had passed, and he decided he was going to take that opportunity to just pump that car with a bunch of bullets. And he cannot be a cop, right? You have to have a panel that reviews these shootings and says, no, you can't be a cop if you're going to do this. What we can't do is write a law that says, okay, if you were assaulted and then the person flees, then you can kill them. We can't write those laws. It has to be case by case. Maybe someday you can have a vast, giant code that's actually kept by some AI, right? Some artificial intelligence, because they'll have the petabytes to analyze every possible permutation of an incident. But it really just has to be analyzed after the fact.
For sure.
Before we get into this video, I wanted to say I like the idea you guys have for the society, like principles that you set up and talk about. Something Phil's saying here is it is really hard to get down for most societies. I think that's why there's so many laws everywhere, and But I agree with them fundamentally on it needs to be case to case, but there needs to be one underlying principle of that case to be able to be shown. And I think even the kid who got shot, the 17-year-old young adult, he should have received what he received, in my opinion. I mean, that may be a little bit harsh and callous, but he went out of his way to do whatever it took to get away. And that's a dangerous individual because he could endanger a family that are walking by, hit them, kill them. He could have killed the police officer if he was just a little bit faster, could have drove over him. So I think if you establish the person is a real threat, right, despite petty crimes and stuff, if this guy has a track record of running away from the police, he likely will do more and more and more severe action over time. So maybe it brings in a RoboCop principle of just, taking them out, but that's not the best way to do it, as Phil said, and I would agree. But still, the principle needs to be made. Anything to escape is basically dangerous.
I agree with you, and I also agree with Phil. So to play devil's advocate a little bit, if you could be shown, like in some future, they created this crazy thing where they had, this is real. They had this guy listen to Pink Floyd's The Wall Part 1, and they put some, sticky wiry things to the outside of his brain. And they were able to basically reconstruct the song from having him think about it. So anyways, in this case where the cop was shooting at this kid, if we could hook him up to a test and we knew for sure he shot at them because he was irritated, the way Phil's describing. If we looked at that, would it be reasonable to fire him even if the same exact thing happened, but if we hooked it up and then we can see he fired at him to save future civilians? Would it be reasonable to fire him if he did the right action to save reasonable civilians, but his only reason was irritation?
I wouldn't be able, even if I saw that, to truly understand the situation, because in the analogy, you may be able to manipulate that hypothetical situation. Maybe there's something you can change about the machine, for example. But what I do know is the cop being fired does have just cause, obviously, because that's why he was fired. But whether I agree with it is different. And I think he didn't really do anything fundamentally wrong in his job. Like, he fired once, I believe, in the video. And that was only when he was hit. So
do you think he should be fired, or demoted to a duty that doesn't involve interaction with people?
That's fair. I would say that wouldn't be as harmful to the officer. I would say demotion isn't too much of a harsh punishment if you believe he's done something wrong. But I would say demoting is a fair punishment for this officer.
Okay,
because he was a bit too fast on the gun.
If Phil, real quick, if he had a clear shot for the kid, didn't take it, and when the kid's just zooming out of the parking lot, he hits his family of 4 or something. Now, I don't know about obvious anything. What would your thoughts be?
Well, that would go down to actually the last time we had to talk about this kind of police discussion. It'd be the same moral scenario as the cop who chose to fire before the suspect went into the restaurant. You remember that?
Yeah.
That's the same moral dilemma. And I said then, as I would say now, you know, if he decides to spare the suspect's life, because in that split-second calculation, he just thinks it's a better bet to try to spare the suspect's life and that maybe nobody will get hurt, then yeah, you say, okay, all right, that's a decent call. Even though it didn't work out. Look, and this is like 100% normal. Like, nobody gets in trouble for like failing to blow somebody's brains out and then they run away and run somebody over. And that's the right call, right? We shouldn't start getting officers in trouble for not killing people, you know, except for the most extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
So like an active shooter, you know, it's like you didn't take him out, you know, that's a different situation.
Yeah.
So to answer your previous question, right? Your hypothetical, where we could have a brain scan of the officer and know that actually he only shot to be resentful versus he only shot to possibly save an innocent person's life because a dangerous person is escaping. To me, that makes all of the difference. And it actually reminds me of a conversation that Sam Harris had with Omar Aziz about a guy who was trying to kill a climber. This is a hypothetical also. A guy's trying to kill a climber with a bow and arrow, and he shoots the arrow. It misses. It actually ends up lodged in the side of the cliff, and the climber's life is actually saved because he can use the arrow to keep climbing rather than slip and die. You know, like is that archer a hero for saving the climber? No, that's attempted murder, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Like, what the intent is the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, and similar to you don't want a person that's willing to be reckless and flee an officer in your society. You also don't want an officer in your society that is going to do bad things, that is going to go off regulation.
That's why it is. I'm not making a moralistic argument that, people with good intentions should be rewarded. What I'm saying is that if you reward people with good intentions, then in the end, that tells you, right, that leads to a better outcome, right? Yeah. So intent tells us about their future actions. Yeah. And that's the point.
There's a devil's advocate to be made there for Phil's argument, because I personally wouldn't say I fully agree with it, but there's real truth in what he says. But, we must play criminal here for a second, right? If I was a criminal, my worst nightmare would be another criminal, and that would likely be a officer who is indiscriminately killing anyone who commits a crime, right? a true anti-hero in any sense. That type of individual should be punished, and I think a police officer who is too quick to the gun, when it can be shown without a doubt, probably does need to be removed or demoted. As a devil's advocate, that's something to keep in mind.
For sure. Well, yeah, and I think there's a handful of different things to look at as well. Like, if you see somebody that, say, you knew committed a crime, but they ran away and you didn't catch them before, and now you spotted them somewhere, and they're sitting at a park bench or something, and they have AR-15. There's a gun there. There's probably a protocol to take because they have a weapon. There's a protocol that's going to have you hidden behind maybe your car, and you announce that you have a gun and they need to put theirs down. But there's probably also a protocol if there's others in the area that something you have to do based on that weapon. So I think possibly the worst thing this cop did in this video is his approach. This person that's likely to flee that is in a weapon, which is a car. The cop opens the door without having his own car behind it, or without clearing civilians or waiting for backup. I would say maybe his biggest issue here is that approach, is that he opened the door and just said, get out of the car. And then that car zooming back is like letting somebody with a gun or a machete run off and do some stuff. So shooting the person that's a possible threat to the world, shooting him in his car, it's complicated, but I'm not too concerned with that. I think he should have known a better protocol for how to approach somebody in a car. And I don't know what the right answer for that is, but it probably involves backup and a car behind his car.
He was far too hasty for sure. It was a stupid approach because the guy got away, but I agree with that.
Right.
I would say though that that's the first thing that crossed my mind is I would park my cruiser behind his car, and then I immediately thought he's just going to jump the curb then, So in front of him. So if he, that's why the first thing I actually said was wait for backup, because then you can have the backup. They do this a lot, where they coordinate, where a car is just sitting parked, and then all of a sudden, without sirens, cruisers come up both in front and behind, right? And then park, and then they get out, guns drawn. I don't know if guns drawn would be the right move here. It might be, because intimidation can save people's lives, especially if it's just a guy eating a burger, right? That's sort of the opposite situation as the guy with the machete, where you're more likely to get good results if you're like, hey, I need your help, I need your help. I need to, I don't know, distract him with something, tell him you need help. So,
but what if he was preventing suicide since the guy was eating McDonald's? So he was harming himself.
And he was murdering a cow.
Right. Yeah. One thing that's kind of interesting, I don't know if the mindset of a police officer or the willingness to put one's own life at risk should affect if somebody should be a police officer or not. But the fact that the guy just opened the car and said, get out, he clearly didn't view the kid as a threat. He didn't view the kid as somebody that would have a gun and pull it on him, because he didn't. Otherwise, he would have went to the driver's side window, held his gun up, and said, get out with your hands up. And so that kind of shows that he is either a reckless person that would have been perfectly fine with marching into Uvalde and going straight towards that door that was being shot through, or he didn't view this kid as a threat and he's just a wild card cop that probably shouldn't be a cop. So it's hard to judge that, but yeah, it seems pretty wild. Okay. Oh yeah. What's up?
Sorry about that. I was going to say before we go on to this, do you think many cases in New York, for example, because it's a big city and there's a lot of people around all the time, that may be why there's a lot of gun officer response? Why many people are shot, for example, in New York, because, if someone's running away with a weapon or a knife, even a gun, you have to take them out, I suppose, in such a small, crowded area. It's something I was thinking about, just a passive thought.
Well, if what you mean is like, if I'm in Chicago or Baltimore, and somebody is, rummaging in the dark, are they more likely to pull a gun? Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's roll on to the next one.
Me to provide and review some context that might be helpful to the general public about the body-worn camera video from the tragic officer-involved shooting that recently happened. I want to be clear. I won't be making any conclusions about whether what the officer did was right or wrong. That's the job of other agencies. I'll simply offer analysis similar to what any investigator might look at when reviewing body-worn camera video of a use of force incident. Let's take a look at the video. Police Officer 1 was already in the front of the Kroger parking lot after a citizen called and asked for help after locking herself out of her car. This is a common call for police. We can see that he's using tools police carry in their car to try to open the locked car door. Police Officer 2, who had just finished with a nearby car accident, is on the scene and also tries to help unlock the citizen's car. As Officer number 2 is working, a Kroger employee approaches him from behind and points to a woman getting into her car. The Kroger employee tells Officer 2 that the woman getting into the black Lexus has just stolen things from the store. Police officers routinely may be focused on one task in a public setting, then, when abruptly interrupted, must then redirect focus to a more pressing matter. Officer number 2 quickly approaches the Lexus and attempts to talk to the suspect. He repeatedly tells her to stop and get out of the running car. It's well within the legal authority of police to temporarily stop and detain anyone believed to be part of a potential crime. Officer 1 appears to notice what his colleague is doing and walks over to assist. As Officer 2 continues to loudly tell the driver to get out of the car, Officer 1 walks past him briskly and moves around to the front of the car. Police officers are generally at greater risk either directly in front of or behind a car for obvious reasons. Drivers can drive forward or backward into the officers when they're in that most vulnerable position. Generally, police training teaches that when two officers have approached a car on foot or intend to interview a suspect on the street, they will take a position that gives them the best advantage for observing what the suspect is doing. In police parlance, this is simply referred to as contact and cover. One officer is attempting to contact the person to be interviewed, while the assisting officer is providing cover or oversight of the scene. Officers are trained that one of the most dangerous encounters they face on the job involves a driver seated in a car. It's dangerous because there are many places in a car where a weapon can be hidden and the driver's hands are often out of view. While this suspect didn't have a weapon, the officers didn't know that at the time. 19 seconds into the encounter, the suspect rolls her window down a few inches and asks why she's being stopped. Officer 2 tells her that a Kroger employee has accused her of stealing. Citizens can ask why they are being detained or ordered to comply, and, in most cases, when there's time and no urgent circumstances, the officer should provide an answer, as Officer 2 does. Ohio law requires everyone to comply with the lawful order of a police officer. Although she's been ordered to get out of the running car many times by now, the driver starts to turn the steering wheel to the right as Officer 1 is directly in front of the car, in a clearly vulnerable position. Officer number 1 draws his firearm and again loudly orders the woman to stop the car. Police officers are trained to draw their firearms when threatened with deadly force, which can be from a gun, a knife, or a vehicle. In the next second, the driver steps on the gas and the car moves forward. When you look at side-by-side footage from both officers' body cameras, you can see that the suspect's car pushes Officer 1 backwards several feet. It's clear from the video that the car makes contact with the officer. In the next second, you can see that both of Officer 1's feet are off the ground. At this moment, Officer 1 fires a single shot through the windshield. Officer 1 is then able to slide off the hood of the moving car as it rolls towards the building.
Okay, I don't think the rest matters. Yeah, Phil, what are your thoughts?
Okay, this, unlike the last car incident, this one is super cut and dry, and I think the officers did a great job. One shot. This is what I was talking about. You take one shot. If you take one shot, and then the car is past you. To me, I understand the argument you're making. I don't think it applies as much to a vehicle because, yeah, the guy was willing to use his car as a weapon, but he wasn't. I have no reason to believe he was actually trying to. He's not out there trying to run people over. He was just willing to hurt someone to escape. And this is the same situation where the car had gotten past the officer. The shot he took was when he was at risk of being run over. Incidentally, I think it's very important to mention an almost identical case of an officer self-defense is what caused the most recent riots in France. So yeah, to me, it's 100% cut and dry. I can't think of a criticism.
Now, do you think part of the justification is that threat that happened, even if he could have stepped out of the way? Do you think the threat is enough to retaliate, or do you think? Because I'm trying to think. I agree with it. I'm totally fine with the shooting here, but part of it's because this person. First of all, I think we need to hold officers in the highest of respect. And so attacking an officer, I think, is one of the worst things that people can do, worse than attacking somebody else. But doing the motion of willing to drive towards somebody, I think, makes this deserved. But do you think it shouldn't have happened if the guy felt like he could have stepped out of the way and chose not to?
I think that I would never, ever think about using words, and I'm not trying to criticize your word choice. Maybe upon reflection, you use different words. But I would never use words like retaliation, right? Or deserved. None of that matters, because police are not Judge Dredd, right? I don't care who's guilty of what. The police are not there to punish them. And shooting somebody is not a punishment, right? It's only the officer's self-defense, and as you alluded to earlier, the self-defense of other people who might be killed if someone is recklessly attempting to escape.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
There's another aspect that we haven't talked about, and I think this one's a good case to speak for, because she's a pregnant woman, right? She's a pregnant woman and actively went out of her way to behave in this way, to potentially steal, so she's vulnerable. She's likely desperate, goes into a car and thinks the best idea is to potentially get in a shootout with officers by trying to drive over one of them. I mean, any responsible adult wouldn't do anything like this. So she clearly shows any rational person who understands situations, things would have escalated as much as she wanted them to get away. Just like probably the first guy, except I think his is a little bit less than this. She actively tried to hit him with the front of the car. What she got was one shot, so he did do a fair job. Not off the book, all to the rules. And then they tried to help her and check up on her. So I think it was cut and dry, as you guys say.
Yeah. Well, and anybody that views the police officers as more wrong due to her pregnancy, for one, I don't think I think we can factor in age. You'd react differently if to a situation involving maybe a 90-year-old and also a 9-year-old. But pregnancy, I don't think that should change if there's a threat of life. But also, she's in a car. I doubt either of those police officers recognized she was pregnant.
Yeah.
But it is worth analyzing as far as her character goes.
Yeah, most people would say the pregnancy gives justification to not, retaliate, as you said before. But as Phil said, maybe not the best word. But to defend themselves, to shoot her was the right call, regardless of being pregnant. And she is the fool for doing what she did. She endangered her own child's life.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to make a eugenic joke about why her pregnancy makes it more appropriate to
Holy shit.
100% not true.
So Phil, okay. What if the officer stood where he was at, but instead of directly in front of the car, it was just a couple feet over? So the one is at the window talking. I can't remember what the term was that they used, but there's the contact and cover. So if the one that was covering wasn't in front of the car, and so they're to the side, and then the car starts to drive away and isn't hitting them, do you think it's good? Because I'm trying to imagine the only reason you would stand in front of the car that I can think of versus to the side of the car is that you're assuming any rational person wouldn't try to run you over, and therefore you're kind of trapping them in. It's probably best they didn't have the time for this, but if one of them could have got their car and pulled it over in front of her. But if it's only acceptable to shoot to kill them when they are threatening your life, like driving at you, and you wouldn't shoot if they're just fleeing, then do you think that it should be recommended that police officers don't even stand in front of the cars, they stand to the side?
No, I think you should stand in front of the car. That's the same thing that happened in France, right, where the guys leaned over on the windshield. The point is, it's like a game of chicken. You know, you're daring someone. You're like, this is how serious I am. I'm putting my life on the line. If you try to escape, I could die. That's how serious I am about killing you if you fuck around.
Yeah, correct. It's the fine line. It's the fine line. You cross that line. It's violence time, basically. And people should, I think the public, personally, in the United States, the public needs to be trained in school about these types of videos, about what we're doing, and saying what is the appropriate response and why not to get in your car and speed past a cop, because this is what happens. People really don't believe their lives in danger in these circumstances. And if they do, they're even more stupid to do what they've done.
Yeah. And they should be taught both ends of it. They should be taught that you listen to police officers, don't do this or your life's at risk. And then also taught to know their rights so they can know the law of like the state they're in, and you know, their Fifth Amendment and First Amendment, various different things to know with these interactions, that how to handle it, the best way to not be harmed, and then deal with it later if it was a bad police officer. But then, yeah, just also being aware that if they think the police officer isn't allowed to do a thing, they might take a risk, where if they know it's at their own discretion, and if you try to do this thing, they might shoot you. I think that right up there with sex ed. It should be the class right after sex ed.
Yeah.
So
maybe before sex ed.
or before. Yeah, either way.
And just to put a point on what I said about why it's important to stand in front of the car, it's not like we're looking for an excuse to kill anyone. Absolutely not. But the point is that, like, the public has to understand, like the criminal element of the public has to understand, you can't escape punishment of a crime, right? Then you end up what we have in some cities in the U.S. where people can just shoplift, and it completely ruins the entire city. Like, you have to have order. So we have people putting their literal bodies on the line to try to hold civilization together, right? It's only a little circumstance that they stopped her shoplifting, but it matters. This is the difference between having a country that works and one that doesn't. So that's why he's standing in front of the car.
Gotcha. Okay, so with the other video with the police officer, it would have been more awkward it being behind the car, but if he stood directly behind the car and had a clear shot and had his gun pointed at the guy and said, "Get out of the car," and then he started backing up the way he did, would it have been acceptable in that case?
Probably more.
Oh, I'm sorry. If he's back. Yeah, because remember, the point is, when he was getting hit by the door, he could have taken a shot right then, because he could have been dragged down under and dragged by the car. But the point is, the danger, in my opinion, I realize you guys are saying he could continue to use his car as a weapon. He didn't seem to have any indication that he would do that. He was just trying to escape, and he was willing to hurt someone to do it. So once the danger had passed, because the door of the car was past him, that's why I don't see that shooting as appropriate, and I'm glad he lost his job. But if he had been standing behind the car, and instead of jumping the curb, the guy decides he's going to back over the cop, absolutely, you have to shoot.
Gotcha. Okay, so if the pregnant lady, if the cop would have stepped to the side and she kept going, so she attempted to hit him, he steps to the side, hasn't shot yet. Do you think, similar to like a warning shot or shooting to wound, that it's reasonable for an officer to shoot a tire of a car, or is that too risky for it to ricochet and hit a civilian?
Oh, is that question directed to me? Sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah, it was sort of directed to you, and then and yeah, either one of you.
Okay, well, in that situation with her, so he's still standing where he's standing, right? In your scenario.
Yes, yeah, but he steps out of the way. I'm just trying to figure out if we don't view this person. I agree. I'm so bad at pronouncing your name. With the other fellow here, I agree that there is reason to view this lady as a threat and a risk because she's willing to drive towards a police officer after stealing and all this stuff. So there could be some future crime, but for the most part, we can just view this woman as somebody being willing to steal stuff and to drive towards a police officer. And then once she's out of there, she's going to be perfectly fine. So I guess I'm just wondering, is something like those two illegal actions worth something like shooting a tire of a car if they didn't catch her license plate number and they think there's no likelihood of catching her after she leaves the parking lot? Or should it all be detective work after they let her go?
It depends. It depends if she steals a certain quantity of cash or, jewelry, steals a whole jewelers. I suppose shooting at the car vehicle is appropriate, but she probably is a petty thief. So shooting in a public space is not, I would say not appropriate for an officer.
I watched the security footage inside, so I guess there's a liquor store connected to it, and she went around with two like large purses and just filled it up with like over $500 worth of liquor. And but I guess the officers couldn't know what's being stolen, and I don't know if I think what's being stolen should affect how you approach them in the moment. Like what's being stolen can affect your punishment once you're caught. I guess I'm just wondering, so if I'm wondering, I like to imagine different scenarios where if something happened so many times, would you change your approach? So as you've both noticed, I've been talking to people about pit bulls lately. So I'll ask people like, what's the number? And they'll say there's no number. And I'm like, okay, so if in 1 year, 3 million 5-year-olds are dead because of pit bulls, you don't change your mind. And so in this case, what I'm wondering is if somebody just shoplifts, and if there's like 1 million cases of people shoplifting, and the approach the officer has to take to stop them leads the shoplifter to driving away, but because of that approach, they couldn't get a license plate or catch them or anything like that. Is there a point where we view their fleeing the officer's orders as now we need to fix our society by having you shooting at people that are fleeing? Like what number changes that, if any?
Personally, I think it's the stance of the thief. So like the more you would steal, I suppose the more you would be willing to protect. If you have a pack of cigarettes, I don't think you're going to be carrying a revolver. But if you go into a store and steal a significant amount of money, I think you've got a backup plan. And I think this lady may, I'm going out on a limb here to say she probably has some backup in her car. I'm not going to lie. Like, she seemed a little bit too eager to get away. Why? £250 worth or dollars worth of liquor isn't going to give her that much time. It's a few months at most, maybe. In the UK, you could steal something worth £1,000 and it only gives you like a few months in jail. It's
yeah, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, there's a chance that her, like, the second the cop's there and she's nervous, what do I do? She's just like, I want to get out of here, so I'm going to inch out of the way. Like, she might have thought, I don't care if I hit this cop, or I hope he'll get out of the way as I slowly inch forward. So I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, you're right. Like, she has a nice car. There's a chance that she's stealing just for the thrill because she doesn't need to steal and people get a thrill. There's also a chance that, she's part of a corrupt family that does a bunch of different crime and she knew she couldn't get caught in this moment. It's hard to know that kind of thing. But yeah, what about you, Phil? Do you think that you might have a certain stance on how something should be done, but then if it becomes more common, then the stance changes?
Yeah. I mean, if things get out of control, that's sort of like, I think that people feel that way about drugs, like it seems, it's like, I completely agree. If something gets out of control, what was the country, El Salvador recently, that like crime had gotten so out of control that they eventually felt like they were in a civil war against organized crime. And so they said, okay, like we're not going to bother with the legal system. We're just going to go out with the army and round up every single member of a gang, period. Right? There's no talking about it. We just do it. We go to real war. So there's a certain point at which all of a sudden you have to suddenly change your outlook, because it's like if your body is under attack by cancer. You have to completely change your approach if something is bad enough. Yes.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I got to hop off here in a sec, but before I do that, I wanted to talk about that law that you brought up, Phil, at the beginning of this. And then I'm going to call it, for right now, since I can't get the whole name down in a easy way, I'm just going to say Kava like Java, but just the Kava part. And eventually I'll get it down. Okay. But so I want to get your take on this too. But so we were talking, assuming that you want to join the group and become one of the senators. As of now, there's no initiation to it. We're just while it's a small amount of people, and anybody I've talked to on my podcast stuff can join. So okay, so Phil, we were talking about the law that was proposed about, can somebody kill somebody trying to break into their house? And you were saying that the breaking in you didn't think was enough. So the reason I worded it that way, and it might need to be worded way different, of course, is, do we leave it up to the discretion of the homeowner? So even though it's worded that can anybody kill somebody that's breaking into their house, we could word how they're breaking in a way that would make it to where you'd go, oh, they shouldn't kill here. But if we leave it to the discretion of the homeowner, any case where a homeowner said, they were breaking into my house while I was in there, I felt like my life was at risk, and they killed them. Is there any case where you would say that that's not reasonable to believe them, that they felt their life was at risk?
Without a doubt, there are numerous cases where when someone is breaking into your home, you absolutely have the right to self-defense to kill them. Probably the majority of cases. Mm-hmm. It's just that, there are cases where the way you have the law written, this could just be used as an excuse to kill someone. It's important that the jury discover, right? They have to go through the process of deciding that it was self-defense. So we can't write a law that says if somebody's breaking into your house, you can kill them, right? What if there's all this evidence to suggest that here's the most extreme case.
Okay.
Let's say they thought it was their house. You knew that they were mistaken. For some reason, you thought it was funny that they thought it was their house, and you decide to kill them, right? Right? I mean, the way the law is written, if they're breaking into your house, you can kill them. You know what I mean? That's just, it should be self-defense. It's all, what it is if someone's breaking into your house, that is part of defending yourself. But we shouldn't have the law that says just flatly, if someone's breaking into your house, you can kill them.
Okay. Well, so what I think would be good to have it worded, why I think it should be worded whatever way we think it's the best way to word it, which could be loose in how you're describing it.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of the laws that are written. If everybody in the society knew those laws, they would feel comfortable acting upon them. So if somebody thought they could kill in self-defense, but then they didn't know exactly what their society viewed as self-defense, they might think like, oh, I actually do think this person's going to kill me, but I don't want to get in trouble for killing them, so I'm not going to do it. And then they end up dying or something like that. Like I want people to feel confident that they truly are doing the right thing and that the law is worded in a way where they would likely be covered. But no, you make a good point. I think your example, if there was a recording device that recorded the people inside going, these silly people, they think they're at their house and they're not. But hey, we can claim that we felt threatened, so we're going to kill them. I think that's a great point, and also a really cool story. I like the idea of coming up with scenarios that would be ones that you would yeah. But anyways, Kava, what do you think?
I agree with his point, but I fundamentally disagree with the approach. I think if someone pretends that they think your house is theirs and they're drunk, you have absolutely any right to blow them off the face of the earth. Personally, even if you think secondhand about it, it's murder with or without the law on your side anyway, objectively. But if someone crosses the threshold of coming into a home, I think they should be completely exterminated at the behest of the person's home. It's their territory, it's their rules. It's like if another government came into someone else's territory, for example, China with Taiwan or something, you have every right to do what you wish to anyone who comes into your state, right? But anyone within your state, let's say my child, I shot my child in the back of the head because they came in through the door one day, that is clearly a problem, because it's just wild. But if a stranger comes into your home and you decide that it's within your right to kill them, then it's within your right. You can do it even if it's malicious.
Okay, well, let me challenge it a little bit. I think I mostly agree with your stance, which I don't think Phil's too far off from that. Aside from there being clear evidence that the people knew that they weren't doing anything wrong, like the audio of knowing that they're at the wrong place. But okay, so let's say the doors are locked, windows are locked. At what point is it okay to shoot? Because I'm guessing you would agree with this idea that if you have a front door with a porch, you are inviting knocking. So somebody can knock at the door. Do you think the jiggling of the knob is enough? Or would it have to be an action that indicates a wanting to forcefully enter? Like the first time a shoulder is thrown into the door?
Yeah, that's tricky because... let's say you have land or a perimeter on the home, the picket fence. If someone comes over the picket fence uninvited, maybe someone could just start railing their AK-47. Some people do this in the US, I've heard. But I personally would say my home, my actual house, if someone tries to enter rather than fiddling with the door or trying to break it in, is go to town on them, Looney Tunes style. Make sure that there's only the boots left. I think that's an appropriate response because it's your territory, it's your space. If someone willingly comes into your space, there should be a clear conduct of how that's going to end, unless you ask.
Gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
so Phil, let's kind of test the limits there. Would you say if the door's unlocked and they just come inside, that if somebody shoots and say they felt threatened and there's no evidence that they were just wanting to kill some innocent person, that if they entered the house, is it okay to shoot?
Well,
I don't know. I suppose.
Oh,
I mean,
that one was for Phil, but you could
Yeah, go ahead.
finish it if you want.
No, it's fine. Go for it, Phil.
Oh, that's fine. What I was going to say is that's actually happened multiple times, where someone just decides they're going to try the door and then walk in. to me.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So,
Are they alive?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Once it was a lady who thought there was just, I think she thought there was nobody home because my car was on the street, not in the driveway. And she tries the kitchen and she walks in, and I come around the corner, you know, and this is just some old lady, you know, like a foot shorter than me. And I'm like, hello? And she goes, is Ron here? And then she's like, oh, I thought this was Ron's place. And then she leaves. Another time, I was just a kid. I was just, you know, like probably 8 years old. And I just have a memory of seeing him in the distance, also walking. This is also into the kitchen. This time, it was because it was just the guy in the city who didn't know my dad was home. He thought it was just my mom home. He walks into the kitchen. And he's like ignoring her at first. He's looking around, seeing what he's going to take, or I don't know what he's going to do to her or us. And my dad walks around the corner. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm looking for Pete. In both cases, it's somebody who they give a name and they're like, and then they leave. Nobody died. We have guns. It could have turned out totally differently. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what was the question?
Oh, it was just if somebody were to shoot, and there was no evidence that they knew the person was innocent. If somebody entered the house and they were to shoot, would you, in almost all cases, say that that's fine since somebody entered the house?
Well, like you're saying, you know, in most cases, yes. But not in all cases. I would never support a law that says if someone enters your house, you can kill them. I would never support a law that says that. It has to be in the context of self-defense. And, you know, so I just disagree with the ambition that you have of making sure that we have a law where everyone knows this is what the law says. They entered my house, I could kill them. You know, like I absolutely am against that straightforward of a law. It has to be, you felt threatened, you had good reason to feel threatened, which you do. If so, in those cases, if we just shot, I probably would have been allowed.
Now, what if the door is locked and it is truly a breaking in? Now, let's see. I'm trying to breaking into their home is how I worded it on the thing. So doors locked, windows locked. I'm sure there's some cases like the one you were talking about where you can overhear this drunk couple that think they're at their own house or whatever. But if the door is locked and the windows are locked, if they break a window and the owner of the house is not aware of any situation where like these people are accidentally at the wrong place, if they break the window or try to use their shoulder to break down the door or like any form of entering the house without an accurate key and with trying to adjust the home, maybe that's the way to word it, adjust the structure of the home to make it to where they can enter where normally they can't without taking some steps to adjust the home. Would almost any, or not even almost, would any time that a person says I felt threatened, that the breaking in part would make it acceptable?
No, it's not. There is no always in these cases. Okay. So, for example, like if I were lying in wait, you know, if they were breaking in, and then I saw like a shadow, that somebody was coming around back, maybe then in court I would say to the jury, look, I didn't know if warning this person breaking into my house would only give away my position, and now I'm outflanked. I don't want to use too corny of a military term, but seriously, like someone coming around the other side of the house while I'm announcing my presence in the forward room, trying to tell someone that I'll kill them if they come in. You know, I feel more threatened in that case. I have to kill the first person to let the other one know how serious I am about defending myself. But if it's a case where it's like, I have no reason to believe that it's anything other than a burglar coming in, who by the way could, like, maybe they're armed, right? But I could, and I know 420 mentioned this in the last case we were talking about, a break-in, of like how in his district, in his state or whatever, it's actually worse to do a warning shot because that means you to think of it serious. That's nonsense in my case because we're talking about the philosophy here. You do a warning shot to let them know you're serious. You do something to scare them off. And if you can convince a jury that you had good reason to be too afraid to do that, then okay. I mean, we should err on the side of the person who didn't ask to be put in the situation, right?
Yeah.
The innocent person. But there's no always. That's my point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a perfect example of a case where it's makes more sense to shoot somebody that hasn't even entered than to shoot somebody that has entered. I agree with that part.
I'm going to be changing a diaper real quick.
Okay, yeah. It's just tricky because I feel like once the break has happened, and Contrarian 420 points out the good word I should have used, which is forcibly enter.
Forcible entry is, without a doubt, I think, needs to be met with violence.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it needs to be accepted to meet with violence. Yeah. Obviously, like in Phil's case where there's an old lady there, he doesn't have to. He can say, I'm not going to be violent to you. But if you are violent to them, that has to be your right to be able to.
I think for most of society, it's an unspoken rule. And I think this is embedded within humans, within mammals, within any animal that exists on the face of the earth, that we have within us a natural, innate drive to kill anything that comes within our territory. And I think if we were to put that in law, if someone steps on my property, I have every right, I think, in my own animistic worldview, because I view things in a more natural way rather than a lawful way. And I like to bridge the gap between these two schools of thought and say why one exists and why one, is sort of discarded. And I think in my country anyway, if you break into someone's home, you can get off with it. You can't be hurt. If you hurt someone in the UK who comes into your home, you cannot even be prosecuted sometimes. You can beat someone up to a pulp of the life, and if they pull out a weapon and stab the aggressor, that person who's stabbed them will go to jail. So the homeowner will go to jail for simple self-defense.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah. So
my wife came up with a challenge for me with this topic because she likes to challenge anything I'm talking about, and she's actually really good at it. And she brought up an example that if you could kill somebody that enters your home and you had like a friend that you hated or something, and you call them up and you say, hey, come on over, door's unlocked. And then they come in and you do it. Now, obviously, an investigation could track down that you did this thing. But it's an interesting example of how you could set up a murder to get away with that isn't good.
Yeah, that's probably has happened in the past. I mean, that's one of my fears. Like, if I were to ever be in the US, you go into someone's home and they blow your legs off. But I think because of the invitation, you are definitely a criminal at that point, because you sitting alone at night, having some hot chocolate or something, having a toasty day, very cozy and warm. Some guy knocks on your door, keeps knocking, starts to try and open the window, lots of noise. It's perfectly acceptable for you to pull out a weapon and fire on him, in my opinion. But most people will say, there needs to be discretion.
What if somebody breaks into your house while holding a cute baby?
He's gone. I'm sorry, I'd definitely say it's a cute baby, and I'm sorry for this, but lock and load. You have to make the law something that is predominantly based
The
on
shooter's
the response.
obligated to adopt the baby if they shoot the person
Yes,
holding the baby.
yes, fair enough. I don't mind. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
If he's holding the baby center and mass, they're both coming, right, baby?
Oh boy.
Man, that is the cutest
Oh.
baby.
I just want to say that if someone steps into your property, you mean, when you say your property, you mean the home, right? Because anyone can walk up to the door, ring the doorbell, knock on the door, even aggressively knock on the door, right?
Yeah, I'd still shoot the shit out of them. I mean, I hate people knocking on my door, you know.
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie. You know, I'm a hobbit at nature. If someone comes to my place uninvited, I'm already annoyed. So if I was in the US, you know, flag me. Don't let me in.
Do you think the house should have to say something like no trespassing or something like that? Because I mean, it's not that we have to accept whatever the common accepted things are, but it's so accepted that people can go knock on a door, and if you were able to shoot somebody that was knocking on your door, I've been watching a lot of police videos, and they refer to the porch as curtilage, I believe, and so anywhere else you can't. Like a police officer can go to a door and knock on a door just like anybody else can, but they can't if they have to step off the porch to like look through a window, they're off the curtilage, so it doesn't count. And so I would say that any reasonable society needs to accept the knocking on doors. Yeah,
I think mail is, you know, you can always, for example, if you're in a community and you've bought a small plot of land with a house and there's loads of other plots the same size, you know, little boxes on the hillside type of houses. The mailman comes. Obviously, I don't think you should blow the mailman's legs off and try to kill him. But he's got a role. The police have a role. Being in that society, you accept that. But I think if your neighbor just randomly comes over to your home, uninvited, I think you've got just cause. I mean, I'm very extreme on this measure because I think as soon as you allow someone into your foxhole, you are at an extreme disadvantage. And I think even like the anecdote Phil gave of the old lady coming into the home, she could have poisoned your pie. She could have, you know, she could have did anything. She could have been the most spiteful little mutant on the planet. And I would have taken her off the face of the earth if I seen her in my home. If I was an American, I mean.
No,
and that's hilarious, but
that's not what happens when someone comes up and knocks on the door. For example, there's an obligation legally that you have if you run into a dog, like you run over a dog with your car, you're supposed to go to the nearest house and just report it, you know? So like you're supposed to be able to just knock on someone's door. That's not entering their personal space.
I suppose. I mean,
maybe you have to have a locked fence or something if you don't want somebody to go to your door.
Like, I think the measures you guys bring up here, like the warning, the fence, having locks, I think they're all acceptable. But I don't think you should just, you know, willy-nilly in this day and age go and just do that, what I've said. But I'm talking about in my world, in my perfect world, I think.
Okay.
If I had a big fence like Carson brought up, I would probably have one. And it would say, don't come in at all costs. Maybe just leave a note, you know, like in a box, because usually people have a mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, say, hi, I'm in the neighborhood. Would like to get, you know, these types of... I think people are too comfortable to get into people's personal spaces in today's society, personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's complicated. And having the sign, I think, is good. But somebody might not be able to read the sign if they just move to that country and they don't speak the language. So I would say in this rare case of what we're talking about with the old lady poisoning your pie, that the fence should be it should be a locked fence where clearly if you hop a fence, I view that similar to throwing your shoulder against a door or breaking a window, you're breaking in. If you have a fence but the gate is unlocked and somebody doesn't speak the language, so they can't read your sign, and they just come to knock on the door to see if you want to donate money to the high school's band project, I don't think you should be able to shoot them, but I don't think there's anything wrong with you taking that stance.
No, I think it's definitely an extreme measure that I hold. Like, some people are not self-aware of certain stances they hold, but I would willingly go out and say, I probably am not 100% right on that, but I would stick to it.
I have a handful of things I'm pretty extreme with. I'm a free speech absolutist in the sense that, like, somebody could write a book describing the best way to kidnap children and do all the horrible things, and that they should not be not allowed to print their own copies and hand it out to their neighbors.
Because how else are the neighbors going to know how to shoot them?
Yes. So yes, it's good to be kind of crazy about some things. But yeah.
Okay. I agree.
I got to hop off here, and so I'm going to end this stream, and then I'll probably chat with Phil for a sec after that. So I'm going to give you the boot. But Kava, I will see you tomorrow for that animal rights talk.
I can't wait to see you then.
All right.
Take care, guys.
All right, have a good one.